This is a big change, isn't it? For a club that didn't have a shirt sponsor until 2006, Trevor, they're going to rename their famous stadium, one of the world's most famous sporting venues, the Spotify Nou Camp, or the Camp Nou, the Spotify Camp Nou, as it will be called in Spain.
Yeah, I think it was inevitable. I think you look at the jurisdiction in place with La Liga, putting the new financial restraints on football clubs, and if they want to continue to compete, not just in La Liga but in Europe, in the Champions League, I think they need to raise revenue, and this is the best way to do it for them. They see this as a huge amount of money being brought into the football club to bring players in for recruitment, and I think if you can't beat them, join them, but at least you've got your integrity. You're joining them by doing something that you've not wanted to do for tradition, but it's still keeping its name. It's just called the Spotify Nou Camp now. I think it's a good thing, and I think it was obviously a matter of time, not if.
It's a full sponsorship deal with Barcelona, so it's not just the naming rights to the stadium, but also Spotify will appear on the front of their shirts, their training kit, over the course of the next 4 years. It's worth $310 million, $75 million annually. Daniel Ek, obviously heavily involved. Does that mean that he is now finished with his interest in Arsenal?
Was he ever interested?
I'm sure he was, but he was never going to get it. Look, I just need to reposition what you said at the beginning about Barcelona's position. That's not a fair representation of it. Barcelona were caught in the middle of a complete and utter restructuring of Spanish football based upon every other league in Europe allowed people to factor in COVID losses, and the Spanish League were not allowed to. So if you look at Everton's accounts, they'll factor in 70 million worth of COVID losses for season 19-20. Right? Barcelona weren't allowed to factor those in. At the same time as the league said, right, we cannot compete with the Middle Eastern money and the Russian oligarch money, so we're going to start controlling the distribution in this league and see if it's a blueprint that other clubs are going to follow, and perhaps also back the European Super League to find a mechanism to generate more revenue.
Is there a slight change in the politics in Spain as well, where traditionally, when the big clubs had got into financial trouble, the local municipal governments had helped them out in terms of buying certain
specifically, you're talking about Real Madrid and the training ground next to it to qualify for the Champions League, and ultimately we all know that was a really smelly set of circumstances. Look, the bottom line is Javier Tebas is a skilled operator. Irony, he pours contempt over the Premier League, and yet he wanted to be the Premier League chief executive. But he also understands the landscape of football and understands where it's headed to and the challenge that it's got. So there was a brave decision. I admire them for doing it. And also there was a change in distribution for the TV revenues, because once upon a time it was loaded and weighted towards the Barcelonas and Real Madrids of the world, and it became a much more collective distribution similar to the Premier League, as did Serie A, because previously it was just for the big Italian clubs like Juve that the distribution mechanisms were weighted and coefficients. So there was a growing up of the thinking. Going to your question, look, if you can't beat them, as Trevor has rightly said, you join them. There are very few spaces and places in the world now that aren't commercialised.
Would you allow it to be called Spotify Selhurst Park?
Well, yeah, if someone was prepared to pay the prerequisite amount of money that enabled the club to compete, because the history of Selhurst Park will be superseded by its deeds going forward. Right? You'll always have the name of Crystal Palace, if they were talking about Crystal Palace in this ridiculous compare and contrast example of comparing Selhurst Park being Spotify to the Nou Camp.
I just meant this sentimental to you, and tradition is really important,
because
tradition, football fans, tradition
but
is.
Tradition, it is. You could turn around and say that playing on the middle Sunday of not playing on the middle Sunday at Wimbledon was a tradition that needed to change, and they've changed it. You could say that putting a roof on Wimbledon has changed the dynamic of how Wimbledon was played. You could look at every single sporting environment, but boxing going having 15 rounds and 12 rounds, and say it needs to change. So Barcelona are looking at the landscape and saying, we need to be able to compete. $300 million is $300 million. We need to refinance our debt. And the thing about Barcelona being in debt, every football club's in debt. Manchester United are £500 million. Man United are $700 million.
But they can service
$800 million. And so can Barcelona. They had to reposition their debt. They had to refinance their debt. And the newspapers are writing that Barcelona were in meltdown whilst they were refinancing their debt, in the same way that Manchester United have done previously. The issue now is, does it destroy the tradition of Barcelona? No, their team failing to win and compete will destroy the tradition of Barcelona. So if you ask the Barcelona socios, and the deep-seated ones, they'll turn around and say, we should never have renamed it. If you look at the ones that are more commercially pragmatic in the real grown-up world that football now exists in, they'll say if Barcelona isn't competing on a world stage, that will take away their legacy.
Yeah, Bloomfield Road. You couldn't have it. Bloomfield Road being called something else. You couldn't have
Blackpool.
Blackpool, of course.
You couldn't have Manchester City Stadium being
Brisbane
called by
Road, isn't it?
Orient. Oh no. Yeah, the Etihad Stadium, sorry. Old Trafford couldn't be anything other than Old Trafford, although the cricket ground is the Emirates Old Trafford, isn't it? So it has sort of slowly crept in, hasn't it?
And
Ever
it will
since the
do,
new
because
stadiums.
it's another way to recoup some money, to go and get better players.
Money for old rope, if you ask me.
Absolutely, yeah, I think so. And you're always going to call Old Trafford. It's steeped in history. It's not going to change.
Adams Park and London Road. There is other official names for them now. I can't remember what they are. But
dollars for donuts. If they do what they're talking about doing, which is rebuild Old Trafford, if they were to take it down, because there's an argument saying that they'll either patch it up and put some lick and stick and some gorilla gaffer tape holding the roof together,
likely,
and make it look better, or if they were to raise it to the ground, build a new 90,000 all-seater stadium, you guaranteed every day of the week and twice on Sunday they'll get stadium naming rights for it.
Tottenham haven't managed to do it yet. Why not?
Well, maybe Daniel's asking for too much money. But don't forget, they've got a lot of NFL money in there as well that's helping them fund that stadium. So it's not necessarily a problem for Daniel right now, but they'll do a stadium deal, guaranteed.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.